seeing we have a quorum. We have one member that is with us remotely, and so we're going to have to do the roll call thing. So I will call the meeting to order, and I'll ask Mark to call the roll.
President Erickson?
Here.
Commissioner Bussey?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Hunt?
Here.
Commissioner Lunds?
Here.
Commissioner Peterson?
Here.
Okay, the first item of business is the approval of minutes. There's a resolution on page 3. I would entertain a motion for the approval of minutes.
So moved.
We have a motion made by Commissioner Bussey, second by Commissioner Hunt. Any additions or corrections? If not, all in favor, I guess we need the roll call.
President Erickson?
Yes.
Commissioner Bussey?
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson?
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt?
Aye.
Commissioner Lunds?
Aye.
Commissioner Peterson?
Aye.
Minutes are approved 6-0. New business. So we have our city manager here, and we have some people that I hadn't seen for a while, Kurt Johnson and some others. So welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. This evening's first topic of discussion is some background information and explanation about a proposal that's been made by an organization called Global Wellness Connections for a grant application to the Met Council to support a technical and feasibility study related to Hyperloop. So Hyperloop would be a high-speed connection between the Twin Cities regional area, starting probably at the International Airport, connecting through Bloomington and to Rochester. I will let them explain the rationale for the connection between Rochester and the Twin Cities, but I do want to share with you that the interest on our part, the City of Bloomington's part, in a high-speed connection to the Rochester area has been more than a decade in the making, that there have been various conversations and various proposals that have been put forward for some sort of high-speed transit or transportation connection. Zip rail was a proposal that was being discussed a number of years ago. There were other proposals before that, because there's a strong recognition for the region and for the state and by economic development professionals that connecting the economies of the Rochester area and the Twin Cities area is in the long-term best interests of the state of Minnesota. And so continuing to look at opportunities as they present themselves is one of the rationales behind this grant application. So I cannot do justice to the technical aspects of this, which is why we have our presentation team here. Donna Corin, and Kurt Johnson from Global Wellness Connections, which is a local 501c3 nonprofit organization that is advocating for this project and advocating generally for developing this region's economic sector related to wellness. We'll talk to you about the aspects of this and the rationale and the fact that they're pursuing a grant application for $2 million to do a technical and feasibility study, which will help to determine the potential of this line and whether there is a future here. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to invite Donna Corinne to the podium and have her explain a little bit more about who Global Wellness Connections is, and then get into the details of the grant application.
Thank you, Jamie.
Welcome, Dana.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, Commissioners and Administrator Masick. Thank you for inviting us here to talk with you. We knew that we would be at some point. We were caught a little bit short by the Star Tribune article, and so we've been doing catch-up to fill everybody in because we know there are just tons of questions, and you're probably getting asked lots of questions, too, about this, given your letter of support. So before I get into the slides, I just want to introduce, again, Kurt Johnson. He's on our leadership team with Global Wellness Connections. I'm the project manager for the feasibility study for Global Wellness Connections. And then on screen we have Chuck Michael. He's an engineer with Hyperloop Transportation Technologies and also the regulatory affairs director for North America for Hyperloop TT. And we've been working with them for the past few years on this proposal, and these conversations. So I'm going to take Chuck off screen now so I can get to the slides, and but then you'll hear his voice as he explains the actual Hyperloop technology. But I just wanted you to see him first. Okay. Can I get to slides? Okay, well, while we're figuring that out. So Global Wellness Connections. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Minnesota. We started, nope, there we go. Okay. We started about 4 or 5 years ago. Kurt was on the founding leadership team. Our mission is to promote and support and build Minnesota as the nation's wellness corridor. That's our large mission. We realize that we have, all of the strengths that we have in health sciences and health care, but not only that, we have our agricultural industry, all of those related industries in that cluster. We have our abundant natural resources in Minnesota, and we believe that we could promote this area for the country and for the benefit of Minnesota and all Minnesotans. Let me just, okay. And the way we operate is we bring together professionals, experts across sectors, across industries, to figure out solutions to the problems that we've all been talking about for a long time.
If you want to point it this way, it'll probably work better. There you go.
There we go. Okay. Okay. So in 2022, we brought together over 100 professionals across the state from all of the sectors that, from agriculture, education, healthcare, government, local and state, to talk about the future of well-being in Minnesota and what that might look like. This was a huge kind of several-month effort. We brought people together over Zoom and in person, and we went through a strategic planning process of sorts. One of the main findings that we came up with, and there was background research that accompanied this, was that Minnesota is going to become a climate change haven. People are going to be moving to Minnesota given climate change and its effect on other parts of the country, and so we need to be prepared for it. So one of the ways that we like to do that is to support building one of the first Hyperloop lines in the country here in Minnesota. And Chuck will talk about Hyperloop and the details, but Hyperloop is carbon neutral. It's transportation of the future, and it could be its own new industry here for Minnesota to develop and develop skills and knowledge and expertise that we can export out. And then again, connecting the Twin Cities to Rochester, as Jamie said, it's been talked about a lot. It seems like it makes sense, but we need to do a feasibility study in order to analyze and quantify how it makes sense. First of all, is it feasible to run the line between the Twin Cities and Rochester? And then what does the population of ridership look like? What are the economic development benefits for the Twin Cities, for Rochester, for the communities in between the 2 points? That's the kind of thing that the economic and technical feasibility study will tell us. So I'm sure you have a ton of questions, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so let me turn this over to Chuck so he can go through what Hyperloop actually is, because I know there are questions about does it exist and that sort of thing. So yes, it does, and he will explain that. And then we can talk about some of the implications for Bloomington and the cities involved and whatever else you like.
Imagine a capsule. Imagine a capsule that can carry people. Placed inside a depressurized tube, the air removed to eliminate resistance. Not traveling on rails, but actually levitating above them. Fully electric with 0 operating emissions, capable of reaching airplane speeds and beyond on the ground. This is a Hyperloop, and it is no longer imagination. At Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, we haven't been dreaming it, we've been building it. From constructing the world's first full-scale Hyperloop system to revolutionizing how we ship freight, our team is building something amazing. We're transforming the passenger experience, putting comfort and safety at the center of everything we're doing. Our reimagined linear electric motor is powered by sustainable solar energy, propelling the capsule on a completely new, incredibly efficient passive levitation system. With these two breakthroughs, our system is capable of giving energy back to the grid. And the best part, all of this is just the start. Our team of over 800 strong, a worldwide intellectual ecosystem of thinkers and problem solvers tackle each day with the humble goal of changing the world. With its speed and efficiency, the Hyperloop will rewrite the rules of travel and mobility. But that's just one side of the story. There's another side that will have a far greater impact. It's the side that redefines how we connect with one another, where distant friends become neighbors, countries become neighborhoods, and everybody who inhabits this big, crazy world of ours grows a little closer together. Just imagine that.
Well, thank you, Donna. I can begin here with a few items. First of all, thank you so much for the invitation to join you today. We're really excited about meeting you and discussing this possible project with the Met Council. My name is Chuck Michael. I lead the feasibility studies and regulatory affairs for Hyperloop TT in North America. We're based in Los Angeles. We have people all through this country and offices in Spain and France and the Emirates and even Brazil. Although I come to you from not too far away in Rochester. So I know a little bit about the area. I've been here for many, many years, and we have a number of aspects to this technical and economic feasibility study we just wanted to present to you very briefly, but it has several elements to it. In the end, what we're looking to develop is a business case to see if this is a self-sustaining, environmentally friendly, and economically feasible study. In our work for the feasibility study, we're engaging the University of Minnesota, both from an economics perspective as well as the Minnesota Geological Survey, because we anticipate some underground work and tunneling. And those folks have as much information as anybody about the geology of Minnesota. We're also looking at combining other team members from around the country to look at the economics of this. But initially, the work is on the ground locally. We start with the stakeholder engagement and public education. And if you haven't already received some questions, you'll probably get an awful lot more. It's new technology, but it's not really experimental. We've taken all of the pieces to this puzzle, and we've been testing them over the past 10 years. We have a full-scale laboratory and operations in Toulouse, France. This was sponsored by the French government. We have a project starting now, an active project in Italy. The government of Italy has awarded a consortium of which we're part of building a 30-mile Hyperloop system from Venice to Padua in Italy. That is ongoing right now. We have projects in Brazil. We have several in the U.S. Working closely with the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Rail Administration. We've been working with Congress for years, working on definitions and the certification framework for a Hyperloop system in the U.S. The route study between the Twin Cities and Rochester is probably the very most intense part of this is the right-of-way. Those of you that remember Zip Rail, you remember any other linear transportation project requires a right-of-way, and that gets very sensitive when you're looking at, in this case, probably 85 miles of right-of-way. The technologies that we've developed, working with not only universities but contractors around the world, there are new tunneling techniques that we're anticipating to use here. We would be testing those tunneling techniques out at a U.S. DOT facility in Colorado before we ever bring it here. But it would be a robotics, AI-based tunnel construction technique that I think you'll find really amazing. So the route study is really the connection of the economic pieces to this puzzle, really beginning at the University of Minnesota, extending through MSP Airport, through Bloomington South, and then probably down the Highway 52 right-of-way into Rochester, coupling up with the city of Rochester and Mayo Clinic and the Rochester International Airport. So in the end, really connecting the two airports in the Twin Cities and Rochester, which in itself is quite an economic engine that we would see the benefits of. The environmental considerations, as you look at the underground construction, there's environmental effects, although much less than you would ever see on the surface. The light rail right now goes underground in a tunnel into MSP, and I think our approach there would be very similar to that. It's a much smaller tunnel than you would ever see for a light rail. It does not resemble the light rail tunnel through Kenilworth at all, but it's really a deep bored tunnel, so there would be very little environmental impacts on the surface. The demand analysis is where the business case begins, looking at the ridership and the revenue, both for passengers and for express freight. We did a major study connecting Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Chicago a couple of years ago and tested out all of the modeling techniques with US DOT and the Federal Rail Administration. So we have now an approved model for this type of demand analysis, and this is what generates the revenues, and then we compare the revenues against the cost to look at the business case. Revenue projections and forecasts, again, this is a big part of it. I want to add here that Hyperloop TT is a research and development company. We're not contractors, we're not builders, we're not operators. We look for other partners to do those pieces to this. If this could be privately developed, then it would be similar to a public-private partnership. We doubt that it would be publicly funded, other than some involvement in the stations, because that would integrate with existing transportation resources in the Twin Cities and in Rochester. Benefit cost analysis really tells you the difference whether or not it's going to make money or lose money, and how much on each of those. This is a required analysis from the Federal Rail Administration. Whether you use public funds or not, it's a good idea to do this benefit cost analysis using their methodology so that they can compare it to other projects around the country. Capital cost is the first question, or the second question. The cost estimates that we do are independent of ourselves, independent of the project team. These are cost estimates prepared by transportation economists primarily, as well as universities and so forth. So we need an independent capital cost estimate so everybody gets as solid of numbers as possible in the feasibility study. Operating cost estimate, again, this is a big part of the ongoing business case of the project, whether it makes money or loses money. If it's going to lose money and you have a negative benefit cost analysis, you have an exorbitant capital cost estimate, and you have operating costs that exceed the income, then it probably would never happen, just like any other successful business. Supply side economic, this is an interesting part of the study. The supply side this is the benefits that you get. This is the jobs that are created. These are the income levels that will change, the economic development potential, that the TOD that you see around stations. So this is a big part of the analysis, even though it's not so much on the cost side. It does tell you what the impact on the community would be. And the governance and development considerations, this is how does a project like this get started? How is it organized? How is it paid for? Major considerations that really take some input from all the communities that this project might touch. And the TOD, again, any large transportation system in the world that you look at has considerable transportation-oriented development that grows around the station. So as we locate the stations in various communities, we need input from the local planning folks, the local elected officials, as far as where do they anticipate this growth to be, where would they like it to be, and these are major policy issues for each community. And implementation steps. Again, how do you organize a project like this? What are the next steps? These projects take several years to develop. There's no question about that. This particular one, if we start a feasibility study today, I don't think you would see construction within perhaps 5 years. So during the study, we would look at the potential route, the connecting university, the MSP airport, going through Bloomington South down to Rochester. We would map a route through there, working closely with the MPOs and MnDOT. Timeline, this project would probably take around a year to complete. A good share of that timeline is input from the community, input from stakeholders, input from planning folks and so forth, really to get a good picture on what this thing would look like. Impacts on Bloomington, Twin Cities. Rochester's an interesting area, as you've been reading about. They're experiencing significant growth with Mayo. They are importing about 40,000 workers per day into a town of 120,000. So as you look at connecting economies, there would be a merging of labor markets, a merging of some economies between Rochester and the Twin Cities. And that's a two-way street, because what benefits one will benefit the other. And that's one of the interesting things that we'll find out in the feasibility study is what happens to the demographics, if you will. Stations and terminal locations, that's subject to a lot of discussion. Again, it's driven by the ridership, it's driven by the revenue, it's driven by available terminal locations. Many of these can be built underground, so we don't really need to consume any of the surface lands for terminals. The extensions, this is an important part of the discussion. Long term, you wouldn't build a transportation system like this that simply connects the Twin Cities and Rochester. You would build it if you can connect Rochester, La Crosse, Madison, Milwaukee, Chicago. The Great Lakes Hyperloop goes from Pittsburgh, again, to Cleveland, into Chicago. And if we can connect over a generation, perhaps, connect the Twin Cities with Chicago, Pittsburgh, and DC, as well as other network effects across the way, I think you'll see the next generation of transportation. And again, the last item is collaboration with, in particular, the Bloomington Planning Division. We really need input on the station locations, the route studies, things that you know best up here. Okay. That was a quick overview.
Okay, well, we had 10 minutes, so thank you, Chuck.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, can you stay on in case we have questions?
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Sure.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Donna and Chuck. So you're at the point you're ready for some questions?
Absolutely.
Or comments? So, Board of Authority Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Nelson.
Thank you. Just a couple
And
things.
we have to warn you, Commissioner Nelson's just new. So last time I had to leave the meeting because I ran out of time, and I appointed him acting president. So he said he's took over the Port Authority, so you're dealing with an important person.
I am dealing with it, yeah.
Not at all. I received assurances that he was not leaving me this time. So, but just a couple quick questions. It was noted that there's been other places that this has been studied. Has it been built anywhere?
I'll let you take that.
The only place it's been built, there's a test center, a full-scale test center in Toulouse, France. There's not an operating system anywhere in the world right now. The first commercial system will probably occur in Italy between Venice and Padua.
Okay. And then you indicated that it could connect in with the Great Lakes Hyperloop. And if you look, when I looked at their plan, actually the Chicago to Minneapolis through Wisconsin portion was listed as a phase 2 of that plan. Why would we not just wait until they are able to do that first phase and develop it out as a second phase of that?
It's a good question. The Great Lakes Hyperloop, to make economic sense, has to connect Pittsburgh and Cleveland and Chicago simply because of the distances between the two. For that to happen, that's a very large project. It's about 400 and some miles. It makes more sense really to take a more of a bite size, if you will, a bite size piece between the Twin Cities and Rochester that has an established demand right now and a need to connect the two communities, and use that as the launch point for an entire Midwest regional system.
I would also like to say from GWC's perspective, we see this as an opportunity. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Minnesota to build this system. This is akin to, the the railroad system that connected our country, the interstate highway system that connected our country that generations before us built. This is our opportunity to build the 21st century transportation of the future that is sustainable, that brings an entire new industry to Minnesota and the upper Midwest for people to work in so many, not even necessarily working primarily on Hyperloop, but all of the ancillary industries that are going to be developed because we would be developing Hyperloop. We would be transportation leaders for the nation. We could help build the network across the United States. So we don't want to wait for the 400-mile line, to get built first and to follow the East Coast, to have it here. We want to start it here in the upper Midwest and build out.
And then last question I have, if I might. There have been attempts to build it elsewhere with other companies. Obviously, Elon Musk has been in this and hasn't moved forward. Hyperloop One recently went bankrupt looking into this. Again, I appreciate the enthusiasm of doing it here, but other places with higher population densities, more industrial, more movement of goods, have not been able to make a go of this. I guess I'm struggling to see why it makes sense here.
Let me address a couple of things there. Elon Musk is certainly a wonderful pioneer. He never did develop a Hyperloop technology. He had an idea, and he published his idea, and he started with a scale model test tube in Hawthorne, California, but he never did have a technology such as we have. As far as Hyperloop One, their business model was much different than ours. They wanted to do it all, design, build, own, operate, and that takes a lot more capital. We have more of a lean asset business case, and they hired hundreds of people. And I think that in an emerging technology, that's a heavy lift, I think, for anybody, and well-intentioned on their part, but it takes a different kind of a business model. We collaborate as part of our DNA. The levitation system, as an example that you saw in the film, was developed in partnership with Lawrence Livermore National Labs. It was initially done as a defense initiative, and then we have an exclusive license with Lawrence Livermore. We enhanced the levitation system ourselves. We have partners, equity partners, in companies like Hitachi Rail that have global experience in high-speed rail. They designed the control system for all of the European high-speed rail systems, and they design our control systems as well. So we have collaboration with them. Our vacuum system was developed by Leibold, that invented the vacuum pump in 1857 or something. So we have some solid, well-seasoned partners in this that bring proven technologies, and we just package it a little bit differently. It's not difficult, in spite of what you hear, to build a vacuum tunnel that's 100 miles long. We do it in 10-kilometer increments. So every 10 kilometers, there's a gate that you can close. You pump it down, you open it up, and you have 100 miles of vacuum system that is all self-sustaining. All of this it's a lot of detailed information, but there's a lot of thought behind this with a lot of heavyweight partners that we brought to the table that have created this technology over the last 10 years.
Commissioner Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I just want to, I'm kind of going a little bit along the same lines that Commissioner Nelson was going on. And the suggestion I have for this study, in kind of researching this, I went and read the Great Lakes feasibility study from 2020. And in particular, what I'd like to see in the study that if assuming this goes forward is a much stronger section around the revenue analysis than what's in that particular report. Because if I do kind of back of the envelope numbers using the data from that particular report, for example, it talks about like pricing commuter use at 25 cents a mile. And if I take that and I apply it to somebody coming from Bloomington to go to work at the Mayo Clinic, which seems like one of the arguments for this to connect the two areas together, that's $18 or $19 each way, which is an expensive commuting cost. And if I take $40 a day and multiply it by 40,000 people outside of Rochester going to work in Rochester, and if you assume that basically all those people commute every day and pay that price from the Twin Cities, it gets you to about $400 million. And that's about between a third and a half of the total revenue forecast for the project. So what I'd like to see, I don't want to go and dig into that because that's a different project than this one, but what I would like to see in the study is more analysis of like, what are people's willingness to pay? What are the kind of actual universes of people who are likely to come from the Twin Cities to go to Rochester on a daily basis and commute in the other direction as well, and have those presented in a way where you can look at that and you'd say, like I would pay that amount of money on a daily basis to go do that. So that's the feedback I have on that. Is I'd like to see a stronger section in that than what was in that 2020 report.
These are all really good points. I appreciate that. The interesting thing about the Great Lakes study is that the fare box revenue is about 60% of the total revenue. The other 40% comes from express freight. And as you look at the existing cost, what the market will bear for express freight now is probably 40 times what it would cost on Hyperloop in order to fly an airplane, as an example, for air cargo. So there's a tremendous margin in there between the existing, what the market will bear in terms of the air cargo versus the Hyperloop cost, and that margin then is applied really to create an equitable fare structure for students, senior citizens, and so forth. So that you're basically buying down the passenger revenue by the additional revenue from the freight side, which I think is a really good idea because you want a very low fare for especially the commuters that go back and forth every day.
Yeah, so the other things, and I think looking at that fare mix is an important thing. I think about like if you look at express freight right now, and if you look just purely at like FedEx and UPS, for example, as kind of two sources of that. If you look at the structure of their system, most express freight ends up going to Louisville or to Memphis in their kind of hub and spoke model. And so the question I have is, you know, if you're modeling revenue around that, is what are the realistic sources of freight revenue between the Twin Cities and Rochester? And Rochester, not an enormous manufacturing location. It's not a horrible one, but it's not like there's a whole bunch of stuff that one would expect going back and forth on an express basis. So and I guess my point is, when this comes back, I'm going to be looking pretty closely at the data behind the revenue forecast part. Because I think that's key to making a project work like that. And if it comes back and it says, hey, we're going to charge people $20 one way to commute, and we think that they're going to pay that, I'm going to have a hard time believing that. So
that's a good point. You know, the interesting thing about the express freight, in particular, Mayo has a laboratory system here, and they import 40,000 samples per day that come in and go out of there. So it's an interesting market in itself, but your point is well taken. Thank you.
Yeah. And so it's just making sure that the data is in the report so we can look at it and make a good decision as a region. So thank you.
Commissioner Bussey?
Thank you, Mr. President. Thanks for the presentation. Interesting, and look forward to hearing more about this. You mentioned a couple of times in the presentation the transit-oriented development, and you talked about the network of stations and so on. Certainly with light rail in the Twin Cities, we've seen the benefits of the stations, and the development along the line has just been enormous, and has certainly justified light rail. But this being a high-speed transit system, how do you balance out, or if you could, talk about the balance between number of stations and the benefits of the transit-oriented development along stations with the speed between point A and point B? And I guess the question is this a local or is this an express?
That's a really good question. If you look at the stations we have, let's take the University, Minneapolis Airport, Bloomington, City of Rochester, Mayo Clinic, Rochester Airport. Every ride would be nonstop. These run like a freeway with on-ramps and off-ramps. So not every capsule stops at every station. So when you're at the university and you want to buy a ticket to Bloomington, that's what you get, is just a nonstop ride to Bloomington. It's a nightmare from a control system perspective, but that's why we have computers and people like Hitachi Rail to help us out. So it's an express system, some longer trips, some shorter trips, but you certainly don't want a technology like this with its capabilities to only go about 10 miles. It really has to stretch its legs and get between, the major population centers. So I would expect the biggest ridership would be between the airports, is my guess. And, right now they fly between Rochester and Twin Cities, however much sense that makes, but you could eliminate all of those flights and just have a 15-minute ride rather than a 15-minute flight.
Commissioner Luntz?
Thank you. I was going to kind of tag on to what Tim was saying. They built a green line between downtown Minneapolis, downtown St. Paul. It's 10 miles. There are 17 stops. It's just pokey, and so people don't use it because it's pokey. So I was wondering on this, we're going about 85 miles, I heard. And do you have any, it's probably premature, but how many stops would there be on that? And then how much of the 85 miles would be underground, how much of it would be surface? And this comes from a guy who spent 40 years doing highway acquisition right away, so I kind of know the drill there. If you're underground, you're acquiring subsurface rights. If you're going on land, it's surface rights, and there's really a big difference probably in the effect it has on the property owners going through. And then lastly, how are you going to cross the rivers, underground or over?
Under. These are like deep tunnels. One thing we try to do, though, is when you're going very, very fast, you don't like curves, whether it's horizontal or vertical curves. Mm-hmm. So you have to really plan the alignment and the configuration. But going under a river is not simple, but going over a river with a new river crossing, and I remember when they built the river crossing into Bloomington, that's not a picnic either. So there's no easy way to get across a river, but I think underground has the least environmental impacts. and at least surface impacts. Any landowner, if it's private lands, the landowner is entitled to compensation, even if it's 100 feet below his house, because that's their land. As you get closer to the surface and the value goes up, obviously, the acquisition of right-of-way on the surface is, that's a career in itself. So I think a lot of it is to avoid that. The other aspect of the tunneling is more expensive than the surface. There's no doubt about that. However, the potential for delay on the surface is many times greater than the potential for delay in a tunnel. And when you take a project that's expensive like this and you lose a couple of years debating access rights and fees and so forth, it adds up very quickly.
Okay, other commissioner questions?
Can I just
Go ahead.
Is there any idea how many stations there would be? How many stops? How many departure points?
Oh, I would say probably 3 in the cities and 3 in Rochester. Well, 2 in Rochester and 3 in the cities. But again, every stop would be nonstop, or every trip would be nonstop. I don't see any station in between, just because it doesn't make sense to break this into small segments. If you do that, you might as well get a bus.
I want to note too that thank you very much, especially for reading the Great Lakes study and for reading our entire application to the Met Council. Excellent questions. And a lot of them will be answered in the technical and economic feasibility study. That's why we applied for the Met Council grant, so that we could get these questions answered, because Chuck knows a ton, and we're making a lot of educated guesses, but we really need the economic analysis, we need the engineering analysis, and we need the public input, all of the community engagement to answer a lot of these questions.
Well, we want to thank you for your presentation. It's exciting. What I'm wondering is if Kurt Johnson took his time to come here, and if Jamie wants to make any kind of comments. And
I would just add, by way of summing up, that these are good questions. That's why we're asking for a feasibility study, because everybody's got questions. And we don't know whether it is feasible to do. Chuck has done a great job of explaining the engineering and answering the questions about Hyperloop. We don't know whether it's feasible to do it. We don't know whether it's feasible to bore. We don't know whether it's feasible to have the number of stops. We don't know whether the cost-benefit study will hold up. So that's why we want to do a feasibility study, because that's the only way to answer the obvious questions that everybody's got.
thank you. Jamie, did you want to add anything?
Mr. President, Commissioners, I think the last thing I'd say is just sort of responding to, I think, some of the, I don't know if you want to call it noise or just sort of the conventional wisdom that's out there when you're talking about some sort of futuristic technology like this. This question about, whether it makes sense to be pursuing something that hasn't been done somewhere else. And my response to that is that not doing so, to say that it hasn't been done somewhere so we shouldn't study it here is sort of the exact opposite of innovation. And one of the things I think that Bloomington has prided itself on is always being forward-looking, that this city has taken some pretty impressive steps into the future. In the South Loop District, there's a really good example of it. You might be familiar with it, Mall of America. That I think that we have a history of being willing to look at things that maybe haven't been done in other places because there's a future. And so I think just from that perspective alone, having interest in projects that will potentially benefit the region and potentially benefit Bloomington, which is a significant contributor to the economic well-being of this region, just is in our common interest.
Well, thank you. This is an information item, so I'm sure as things progress, we'll hear more. So thank you very much for your presentation. So I guess
Thank
next...
you so much for the invitation.
You're very welcome. So the next thing we have is the Port Authority work plan, and I see Holly was hustling to go down or up or get the clicker or whatever. So
Adding the clicker.
your clicker.
All right. All right, good evening, President Erickson and commissioners, and thank you to our guests for coming. So this evening we will be talking about the 2023 Port Authority Annual Report as well as the 2024 Work Plan. You all had it in your packet, so I will try to be brief with my words this evening. All right, so as a reminder, our context of moving from 2022 into 2023 for our annual report was that the Housing and Redevelopment Authority underwent an assessment that dictated that the Port Authority should move from just the South Loop area to citywide and should take on some of the larger multifamily housing complexes that the HRA had been working on before. And so with that, we wanted to impose a levy for the first time to help pay for some of that work, and the Port Authority would take on some other powers and activities that they had not taken on before, including business assistance. We also, at that time, moved placemaking citywide and took on some funding for that as well. And so a lot of those activities are shown in our 2023 annual report and will continue to be shown in our 2024 work plan.
Holly, I just want to make a comment. Holly and I have talked quite a few times, and we had an item on the our last meeting, the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, where we were clearly dealing with something that we hadn't dealt with before. And I think we're going to have other things like that that are coming up. And as we get into these issues, I think what's important is that we have an open questioning in that. And as happened with this Opportunity Housing Ordinance, I think there was an opportunity for staff to meet with some of our commissioners and give further information on that. And so we're going to be having this happen this year and probably in the future years as we look to expand what we've been doing traditionally from South Loop to the city as a whole. So it's something that all of us will just have to maybe roll up our shirt sleeves or whatever from time to time and get in and ask some questions. And I think the debate is good and the discussion, but it's something that is inevitable just as we deal with this.
Thank you, President Erickson. I appreciate that. And to reiterate that, if there are topics that come up, if you see them in the agenda packet or even in between you see something at council that you have questions about, I encourage you all to reach out to staff so we can help you with those conversations. Further, as we looked at this, we now realize the Port Authority used to be responsible for about 2 square miles of the city, and now we are working on 15. So be patient with us as we expand our services citywide, but we are excited to take that on. There we go. So a quick recap of what we saw in 2023. We spent about half of the year working on Expo. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful, but that was an exciting opportunity to collaborate with the region, work internationally, and promote the profile of Bloomington. We also hired new staff. We have Marit, our office support specialist. We have Kenneth Niemeyer over there, Catherine Murray, who's not present with us this evening. So exciting to see the port grow. We updated our website and rearranged information to be more accessible. And as you are out talking to people in the community, we hope that's useful and we welcome your feedback. And continued process improvements, working with our legal team to make sure we had the full calendar mapped out of all the activities we need to undertake as we now have a levy. And then finally, we, at the end of the year, chose our consultant for our 5-year economic development plan, which is TIP Strategies. And that plan is to help guide us as we do expand our services citywide and determine our priorities for Bloomington. In development and redevelopment, this should all look familiar. You saw much of it come through more than once. Europolis is a small business that we helped with some demolition, and you will see some redevelopment in that site in the spring of 2024. SICK is looking at phase 2, including a parking garage that we are helping to build and fund. Carbon 31 is part of Bloomington Central Station. 700 American, we had an RFP come through to select Schaefer Richardson to work with us on that redevelopment, which will include senior housing. And then the Mall of America, we continue to grow our relationship with them and have conversations about their next phases. Additionally, we took on working on the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. We now have our housing development specialist, Kenneth Niemeyer, who you will hear from later on today. And so his hire was an exciting moment for us. He is shared staff with the HRA. We will continue to provide development assistance now to large projects, 20 units or greater, as the port had that capacity and that ability in-house. We will do outreach and compliance. We had some conversations about compliance last time, but that helps us make sure that when the city is assisting with building affordable units, they continue to stay affordable in the ways that they were intended. And then amending the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, which is our inclusionary zoning policy that is meant to be a living document and gets amended regularly. Gotta keep pointing this backwards. All right, and then business retention and expansion. This was an area that we wanted to really tell the story of this year. We participated in the CHIPS Coalition with Greater MSP, and were able to help with applications for state and federal funding for some of our manufacturers here in Bloomington. We continued to provide grant assistance, and we started doing business retention visits with which the mayor and the city manager have been participating in to make sure that we're paying attention to our large employers here in Bloomington and hearing what they need to stay here and grow here. And finally, we've been working on our real estate relationship building to get to know the broker community here. We hosted a broker update in this room in December for the first time and had about 25 different brokers come. We got very good feedback, and we'll be repeating that. We went to the ICSC Retail Conference in Las Vegas and met with brokers there, and we will be repeating that as well. And we are trying to participate a bit more with MinCar and their expo, which is a local commercial real estate organization. And if Bloomington can have a booth, we're going to try. And then business assistance, which is really a growing arm for the city. And I should say the port is not the only one working on this. There are those across community development and the city trying to put a lot more intentionality behind our relationships with small businesses. And so we've been working a lot on our regional partnership development, getting to know the organizations at the county, the state, the nonprofits, the chambers, providing technical assistance and advisory programs. We don't do that in-house. We actually refer. And we just got our numbers back. We referred over 1,000 hours to Elevate Hennepin, which is technical assistance, and about 480 hours with Open to Business, which is an advisory service provided by MCCD. We do provide direct assistance for small businesses that reach out and have questions about how to get through the permitting process with the city. And then we do proactive outreach as well. We are going out every month to different commercial nodes to connect with those businesses. We've been working more intentionally with communications, and they did 22 pieces on small businesses this past year, and then continue to support the small business center development. All right, so moving into 2024, you have seen a lot of this already as part of our budgeting process. But again, our main areas of function are development and redevelopment, including assisting with affordable housing, business assistance, and creative placemaking. And our work should always be aligned with Bloomington's strategic priorities, which are to create a connected and welcoming community, a healthy community, and a community with equitable economic growth. We created the Bloomington Business Continuum this past year. Thank you for the suggestion from the City Attorney's Office to help pull together some of these different programs and initiatives that the city is doing across the board. And that is looking at everybody from early stage ideation to those large businesses that we're helping with expansion. In our work plan, we are going to continue to work on that 5-year economic development action plan. We are going to be updating our bylaws, which we'll talk about a little bit briefly with you later. Partnership development externally will continue to grow our relationships with Greater MSP, DEED, and others in the region working on economic development. We'll continue to collaborate across the city. There are so many working on business assistance. We want to make sure that we are all talking to each other. Marketing and business attraction, we will be, as I said, repeating those activities that we did for commercial real estate brokers last year. And then business retention, continuing those visits, and process improvements. We've already had a development agreement training with Julie Eddington Port Council, and we will be looking at our business subsidy policy this year. In development and redevelopment, we will continue to work across the city on projects that impact development, like our sewer system. We will continue to look after our TIF and business subsidy administration and make sure we remain in compliance with all of that, as well as grant application and administration. we know now that Greater MSP is looking at MedTech 3.0, and you will be hearing from them next month about that. Affordable housing and OHO administration, and then developments you should expect to see next year. SICK, perhaps a Thunderbird site, 700 American, Bloomington Central Station, Longmeadow Circle, and the 98th Street Station site. In business assistance, we will continue the activities that we've been doing and refine them, measure them, evaluate them. That includes the direct outreach and assistance that we've been doing. Policy development, our planning team's being very active right now with looking at changing ordinances and code to make the city more business friendly. Partnership development with smaller and larger organizations, program administration, continuing to support the Small Business Center, working with our communications team, and then being really mindful about data collection and creating a CRM system so we can track as we're speaking to businesses. And so with that, I will take any questions.
What are the questions? If we're comfortable, then there's a motion, it's on page 49 of your package, to approve the 2023 Port Authority Annual Report and 2024 Port Authority Work Plan. Yes, Rob?
Yeah, I had a question. Earlier today, I spoke with Holly. I don't know if you made that. We're approving the work plan here, right? So are those changes we discussed inculcated here?
They are not inculcated in that version, but I can update them today if you'd like to explain them to the team just to make sure they're memorialized.
Sure. We've got two items on page 5 and 7. There are two development project sections with bullets. And we discussed putting them all into one. And then I had a little bit of concern on some of the narrative there. On page 5, development projects, administration will continue to support, the word support bothered me, projects as needed, including Mall of America Water Park disposition of the Thunderbird site. I don't know that maybe a more appropriate word would be to analyze and process projects as needed, including the Mall of America Water Park and the disposition of the Thunderbird site. To me, it indicated that it was leaning towards a done thing, the water park, and that. And then I thought, well, why aren't those in on page 7 under that a longer list of bullets, which are labeled development projects? So I thought that would be an improvement to the work plan.
Thank you, Commissioner Lenz. And I will say I'm happy to incorporate those changes. The word choice of support was simply to indicate that I would be supporting staff as the administrator in those two particular projects, not that I would specifically be supporting the projects or that the port specifically would be.
Right. I mean, when I first read that, I was wondering whether that was you were making a recommendation already to the Port Authority.
Commissioner Lenz? No, so I'm happy to incorporate those changes. So if you were to make the motion to approve, we would incorporate them and make those changes.
I would make that motion. I scribbled some language here. You can take it or you can use your own.
Commissioner Hunt? Okay. We have a motion made and seconded. Any further discussion?
Actually, Mr. President, if I could,
Schleswig?
thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to compliment the Port Authority on the work plan, and especially how it intentionally looks at both large and small businesses in Bloomington. We've got large businesses in Bloomington. We've got some massive businesses in Bloomington, whether it's Toro or any of our chips manufacturers or the Mall of America or Thermo King. I mean, you can go on and on, Donaldson. We've got a number of large employers, but we know that the vast majority of businesses in Hennepin County are businesses of 100 or less. And I appreciate the fact that this work plan incorporates both. It doesn't look at one at the expense of the other. It does incorporate both. The outreach and the work that has been going on to connect with those large businesses, I think, has been very valuable. The Small Business Center, I think, will be incredibly helpful, and I like the outreach to businesses, small businesses in the city. I just appreciate the fact that it's not an either-or kind of thing. It takes into account all of the different businesses we do have in Bloomington, and not only the size, but the variety and different types of businesses. So I think it's a strong plan, and I would recommend or strongly encourage that we continue that path because it's that effective mix, I think, that makes a local economy strongest.
Good.
I'd go along with that, just from hearing, and I hear from a different
If you could turn your
On the
mic on, please,
microphone.
Commissioner.
hearing from a different level and constituency than what you hear, but it's always that, does Bloomington support me as a business? And what does Bloomington do? Whether it's very, very large or medium size, certainly the smaller ones that are starting up, but we value all of them, and we want to make that known. So,
Okay, other questions, discussions? If not, we've had a motion made by Commissioner Luntz, seconded by Commissioner Hunt with the changes as indicated. Mart, do you want to call the roll?
President Erickson,
Yes.
Commissioner Bussey,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt,
Aye.
Commissioner Lenz, Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. Okay. The next item we have then is creative placemaking, annual report and work plan, and this is for information for us because it's already, there's another board that's involved, so welcome. We're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Hello, Commissioners, Mr. President. My name is Alejandra Palinka, and I'm the Director of Creative Placemaking here at the City of Bloomington. And I'll just be providing some highlights of our 2023 activity and accomplishments and our 2024 work plan. The work plan was attached, so feel free to ask me questions if you'd like me to discuss something in a little bit more
Excuse me, Allie.
detail.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you to get closer to the microphone?
Oh, sure. Yes.
Get the microphone closer to you.
Just
Thank you.
move it, right?
Appreciate it.
There we go.
Perfect. Yep.
Is that a little bit better?
Better.
Perfect.
better.
Could I
Thank
get
you.
my presentation up, please? Thank you. Maybe I'll stand over here just in case. All right, so the South Loop Creative Placemaking Plan, the vision and the goals have really guided our work plan strategies and project priorities over the years. And our vision is that our sustained efforts will establish a South Loop as a distinctive destination known for welcoming people and using the arts to transform the neighborhood physically, socially, and culturally. As you all know, we're also working on expanding our creative placemaking throughout the city as a result of our citywide strategic plan priorities. So I'll start with just a few highlights from 2023. So first up, we sponsored Bloomington's first Juneteenth event, and this is part of our citywide side of things. So you'll kind of hear me talking about South Loop specific projects and events and some citywide initiatives that started off in 2023. This was held in June 19th at Kennedy High School, and it was really led by community members. So there was performances, food trucks, vendors, music, and more. We also worked with community development staff and partnered with Juxtaposition Arts on creating a temporary art installation on site at the future Small Business Center, and also worked with them to do some focus groups, youth engagement, and held an open house event in August. So this just helped give us a little bit more guidance and direction in the development of the center. For the Latino Conservation Week Festival, we partnered with the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge, and we held it at the Visitor Center on July 22nd. There were food trucks, music, performances, art installations and activities, nature education, and more. We also created a mural on site during this event to help reflect the combination of Latino culture and nature education. We also finalized some of our site work at the new South Loop Community Garden, and I just want to thank again Parks Maintenance and Parks and Recreation for partnering with us on this project. We installed cyanotypes, which are basically sun prints, and they're a key feature of the landscaping on site, and helped develop some of the plots and some of the details of this site. The bright blue fabrics aesthetically represent the Minnesota River Valley, which is obviously very nearby, and they share the story of the land, honoring the sun, water, and histories of the significant Minnesota River Valley, the life it supports, and its value to Indigenous communities. And that was by artists Sheila Novak and Erin Genia. We will be hosting I'll talk about that in my 2024 update, an opening for the garden. We hosted an Indigenous History of Bloomington presentation here at Civic Plaza with Dr. Kate Bean and Peter DiCarlo. It's recorded, so I encourage you to take a view of it. It's a very interesting, fascinating, more in-depth look at the Indigenous history of the city, and it was very well attended and well received. This is one of our citywide initiatives where we focused on Old Shakopee Road and Old Cedar Avenue with some placemaking projects. And we worked with the local businesses to install projects such as a custom bench, signage, window decals, and landscaping.
It's been fun just to go around and see some of those benches and things like that. I mean, again, you have all those power supply boxes on the corners, and all of a sudden you look at one and, you know, instead of just being kind of army green or whatever, it's kind of fun.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next year, I will just hint that we're working on a box actually at Old Shakopee and Old Cedar, and we're working with the local business at that intersection, Ocean Blue Tattoo. They're developing a design for that box, so you'll see that wrap this year.
Good.
We installed 4 hometown poetry signs. These were all made the poems were by Bloomington residents, and these signs went into 3 parks in Bloomington. We installed 10 of the stamps. We have 4 remaining that will be stamped this year. And we also created a map of all poems and locations on our website. So some highlights from 2024.
You know, just going back to that stamping and that, especially as you travel around a lot of European cities, one of the characters is you will see these things that make you stop and look and listen. And, you know, it's kind of built in. It just, you know, improves the experience. So, you know, over time, it becomes even more interesting because obviously different ages, different people. So it's just kind of a nice thing to do.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've really loved that project specifically because we worked with residents from age 10 to 94. So it really integrates different types of creative expression. It really integrates it into our city and the infrastructure. And I think it's just a really tremendous source of pride for a lot of them.
And if I could, Mr. President, I spent 5 years at the University of Minnesota trying to do that exact project and got nowhere. And
well, that's not when I was senior VP then, too.
And Creative Placemaking came and got it done. They're fantastic work. It's a great project.
Thank you, Commissioner Bussey. So for 2024, we will finalize our work at the South Loop Community Garden. Some final work includes installation of benches. We have a picnic table coming in, this artistic shading structure. And as I mentioned briefly before, we plan for an opening celebration on Saturday, June 29th from 1 to 4 p.m. We'll have music, food, artists on site to lead the activity, and we're really going to encourage walking or biking there as we have very limited parking. So we're really going to focus our promotional efforts on the neighborhood residents and for gardeners to come and attend. Yes.
I missed. Where is this on East Old Shakopee Road?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I didn't mention that. That is on East Old Shakopee and just south of 86. So it's right next to the new fire station number 3. It's just south of fire station 3, kind of on that, southeast intersection corner. Oh, number 3. The number 3 is down the 86th from the old fire station, the new fire station number 3.
Brand new one. The Mall of America one.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We also have a lot of events to activate the Bloomington Central Station Park. We held off on this for a variety of reasons because there was a lot of construction in the area this past year, but now we're really excited to partner with Parks and Recreation on a Sunday Fun Day music series at Bloomington Central Station Park. The dates are listed here, June 23rd, July 14th, and August 4th from 4 to 6:30. And we're also working to host the On the One Festival in late July or August in this venue as well. We're working again with the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge. We had a really successful event last year, so we're excited to partner with them again at the Visitor Center on Saturday, July 20th, again with a variety of performances, art installations, activities, nature education, and more. And we'll continue to work with artists Sandy Spieler and Tara Perrone. They led a pop-up guided activity last summer to really reflect on the site with the users and to really help inform the development of an art installation that will reflect on the site and connection to Indigenous history. We're also continuing to explore and refine our process for exterior art projects for the small business center. And so we'll be working with that in tandem for a timeline of construction. And that could be things like bike racks, entryway art, a potential mural on the building. So we have a few opportunities already identified. We're also partnering with Parks and Recreation and working very closely with their Dakota Advisory Committee on an art installation at the Pond House. And we hope to develop our call for art and selection of our artists in 2024. And of course, one of our biggest initiatives for this year is the development of a citywide creative placemaking master plan. We'll be working with our consultant on a very robust engagement plan through the summer. It'll include things like an advisory group, focus groups, pop-up activities, and really working with artists to lead that creative engagement process, with a celebratory event more towards the end of the process and the identification of a demonstration project. And the delivery of our final plan will be in December. We'll certainly send some opportunities to become engaged in that process to the commission. We hope that you join us. And with that being said, I'll just leave it there for any questions you may have. Thank you.
Commissioner, questions, comments? Well, thank you very much. I think it's exciting, and it's just...
Yay.
What was that, Rob? Commissioner?
I'll say yay.
Yay, okay, well, that's good for you, see? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So that was just an information. We don't have to take any action on it. So the next item then is the Bylaw Commission project update. Holly, you want to talk to that?
Thank you, President Erickson and Commissioners. This is a brief update just to let you know that we are looking to undertake the updating of your bylaws for the Port Authority Board of Commissioners. This work has not been done formally in the last 10 years, so there have been looks at it, I believe, in that period of time. So the process that we are hoping to undertake is as follows. We will have our Port Council as well as the City Attorney take a look at the bylaws together, take a first pass, make sure that they are standardized with the rest of the city and also with our state statute and what best practices are in other communities. We will then have an appointed commissioner take another look at them, and then we will present those changes to you to accept either next month or the month after. It is not a rushed process. We want to take our time with it, and we welcome your input as we go.
So I was talking with Holly about this, and since Tim Keller is an attorney, I thought if he would be willing to do it, he would probably be the most logical person, and Holly has talked to him, and he's willing to do it. I'm also willing to appoint any other commissioners that want to look at the bylaws. I've found bylaw projects are really a good way to put me to sleep, but but they're very important too. So if anybody else is interested, I'd be happy to appoint them too. But otherwise, I would appoint Tim Keller to be the Port Authority representative on the Bylaw Commission. And if we're okay with that, then I think we can move on.
Mm-hmm.
So the next one is the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, and we're going to have Kenny talk to us. I believe you like to go by Kenny instead of Kenneth, right?
President Erickson, Commissioners, yes, thank you for the intro, and thanks for having me again tonight. So we'll go through the Opportunity Housing Ordinance proposed amendments that you considered last month in a study session. We were able to take your feedback and put together some revisions that I'll present on tonight. And then we're also going to go through some background on the OHO. So some of the members got to get a little bit of that Thursday of this week, but we wanted to make sure everyone had the opportunity to get some of that background, to get an understanding of how the port is in kind of the OHO is in the port's hands, and there are some items to consider with its history and how we got to here. So I will just jump right into that background, first of all. So the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, it's been in place now since 2019, and it came out of a Housing Nexus study from 2018. So that Nexus study looked at when a market rate housing is developed in the city of Bloomington, what is the resulting demand for affordable units, and that was kind of the baseline for the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. So that Housing Nexus study also informed what incentives the OHO would offer its developers going forward. So through this process, there was a lot of outreach and dialogue with developers in the Twin Cities and specifically in Bloomington to understand what their reactions would be to this policy coming into play. And there was an intention that whatever did come into play wouldn't be financially burdensome and wouldn't prevent projects from moving forward within the city, so that the constraints there wouldn't be constraints to financial viability of new market rate housing developments. So after the Housing Nexus study of 2018, the ordinance was adopted in February of 2019, and there was a 6-month trial period essentially looking at what are the outcomes of the policy going into play, and then it was reconsidered and amended and went into full effect in September of 2019. So as Administrator Masek mentioned earlier, this is a living document. That's the intention. There have been multiple amendments throughout the years since the OHO came into effect, and the intention with that is to ensure that the OHO continues to be relevant to the economic conditions of the Twin Cities community development market, and that as we analyze the outcomes of the policy being in place, that we're responsive and that we can also react to feedback that we're getting both from developers as well as the people that are actually living in these units that have been created. So I've pulled out a couple of the purpose statements for the OHO. There are more, but I felt these were highly relevant to some of the proposed amendments, as well as just why we're bringing this item. The purpose is to establish an affordable housing program that promotes flexibility in development and is adaptable to changing economic circumstances and market conditions. It's to implement city council and city affordable housing goals, policies, and objectives. It's to allow a bundling of incentives for a single development to provide housing units affordable to the extremely low and very low income populations in need of affordable housing. And the purpose is to allow for the city council to review and revise requirements for changing economic circumstances and ensure responsiveness to housing needs. So just wanted to go through. Sorry about that. So the Opportunity Housing Ordinance sets forward a requirement that 9% of a project's total dwelling units must be affordable to households earning 60% of the area median income. So that's the requirement, but there are different ways to comply with that requirement. So we've highlighted those main ways here in front of you. And the main way that we've seen compliance take place is with on-site development of those units. So that just means that within a development, for example, a 100-unit market rate development, those 9 affordable units that are required are being incorporated within the development. So it would be then a mixed income housing development. There are also options for paying a fee in lieu. The rate for the fee in lieu was also set by that Housing Nexus study, and it's currently set at $9.60 per square foot of total dwelling space within the proposed housing development. And the developer can pay that fee in lieu to the city, and the city will then place that into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for use on future housing activities, affordable housing activities. The developer also has the option to essentially hold that fee in lieu in escrow for a different affordable housing development where they capture the originally required affordable units as well as what would be required in the additional development. So within the proposed ordinance, there's an update to that. As written, it was 20% of units, but we wanted to ensure that we're not losing out on any affordable units. So it would be the 9% of the original development and 11% of the proposed development. So developers can choose to assign that fee in lieu to an additional housing development. They could also dedicate land with a value comparable to what the fee in lieu would be. or they can purchase and rehab naturally occurring affordable housing, so NOAA housing, existing units within the city of Bloomington, and set those aside 20% of the units within that development for households earning 60% AMI or less. Just for your information, these are what the rent and income limits are currently set at. We're in 2024, but we're still operating on 2023 numbers. The reason for that is that our numbers come down from HUD, from the Housing and Urban Development Department of the federal government, and those numbers are typically released by HUD, the updated numbers, in April, May of the active year. So we expect to get our updated 2024 limits in a couple months here. And we send those promptly out to our property managers that we work with so that they can update their rent limits and understand how much income those households that they're serving can earn. So I mentioned incentives, and there are two main tranches of incentives. There's financial-based and there's development standard flexibility-based incentives. Financial-based incentives are pretty straightforward. The city has its Affordable Housing Trust Fund that I mentioned the fee in lieu pays into, then other affordable housing developments could apply to utilize those funds. We also have tax increment financing. We could do, if the city owns the property that's being developed, there could be an opportunity for a land write-down, and the list goes on. And these financial-based incentives are more competitive. These are things that we would consider providing a developer if they go above and beyond what's required. So if they're providing that baseline requirement of the 9% units, it's not likely they'd be eligible for any of these financial-based incentives. If they're going beyond and say the entire development is affordable at 50% AMI, it's much more likely that we would be able to support them with a financial-based incentive. What is more common is these development standard flexibilities. So these are things like a density bonus, a height bonus, or parking stall, the reduction to the required number of parking stalls. And these are definitely popular, and we work closely with the planning division on these development standard flexibilities. So when developers come in with their proposed site plans, we're looking alongside our planning division staff to figure out what the developers are asking for in terms of flexibility, and if they're eligible and granted those flexibilities under the OHO. So those are the two main tranches of incentives. Apologies for the typo on the header, but I wanted to highlight what the Port Authority's role is in terms of the OHO. So the lower part is accurate, just so you know. So within the role of purview for the Port Authority with regards to the OHO is reviewing the ordinance amendments as they're brought forward. The Port Authority has a role with compliance and enforcement in tandem with the legal department, and the role of compliance is what the housing development specialist, so that's myself, carries out, and my time is majority with Port. And then determining the level and type of financial assistance, so those financial incentives that I mentioned earlier, that would also be within the purview of the Port Authority. And then outside of the role of the Port Authority would be reviewing development applications. That would be the planning division. Ensuring the proposed affordable housing plan complies with the OHO standards. Again, that's planning. Reviewing OHO incentive requests for appropriateness, also planning. And then the Affordable Housing Trust Fund decisions come to the HRA.
And Kenny, on that slide, I mean, again, you've got the within role, and all those things are things that the Port Authority was not involved with before. I mean, we may have been peripherally involved with in South Loop when we had some housing and stuff, but certainly not on a macro basis of the city, so.
Thank you, President Erickson and commissioners. And you bring up a good point. I didn't mention the background of how the OHO came to be with the Port Authority. So just to give a quick summary, when the port went citywide, it was occurring concurrently with the HRA doing an assessment of their responsibilities and duties with regards to community development in Bloomington. That assessment found that it was strategically beneficial to have developments of 20 units of housing or more be handled by the Port Authority, and then anything less than that be handled by HRA. So that was how that purview got extended to the Port Authority. and how these requirements kick in when those developments are at that 20 unit baseline. So thank you. So I also wanted to highlight where some places where the purpose of the Opportunity Housing Ordinance aligns with our greater city goals, as well as our regional goals. So what you're looking at here is Bloomington Tomorrow Together. And so those are our priorities citywide. I'll just go through the names here and then suggest some ways that I see the OHO aligning with Bloomington Tomorrow Together. So Bloomington Tomorrow Together is to create a connected, welcoming community, a healthy community, and a community with equitable economic growth. So I see the OHO creating opportunities for people to be welcomed into the city and feel valued in their home, in a dignified place that they live. That's creating a connected, welcoming community. The OHO is improving human health, safety, and security by providing stable housing for people, which we know is a foundational point to jump off to then succeed in other parts of life. That's creating a healthy community. And the OHO is contributing to equitable job growth by providing workforce housing in Bloomington and helping the city's growth be equitably distributed across the city. That's creating a community with equitable economic growth. I'll also mention the Met Council's regional goals with regards to affordable housing. So the Met Council forecasts future affordable housing needs using a regional economic model and then allocates a share of that need to all communities within the metro area. So the spreadsheet that you're looking at shows the housing need that was allocated to Bloomington for the 2021 to 2030 period. So if you look at the bottom row of this table, you'll see what our need allocation goals are for that time period. So we've performed very, very well on units affordable at that 60% AMI level. We've exceeded that goal. This is specifically for developments that have opened or that are under construction. So this is leaving out developments that have been approved for development but are not yet under construction, just for information. So we've exceeded our goal for 60% AMI. We're a little over halfway to reaching our goal for 50% AMI units, but we have a long, long way to go when it comes to 30% AMI units, and that's that very deep level of affordability. Oftentimes, these units aren't, it's not feasible for developers to provide these without some sort of financial subsidy. So whether that be subsidy from a federal source like the low income housing tax credit program, from a local source like the affordable housing incentives that the county provides, or at an even more local level like the city of Bloomington providing affordable housing trust fund dollars. That's how we can get these 30% AMI units in our community. So I also just wanted to go through some upcoming work that's related to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance. Some of these items you'll definitely see and hear about. So the main one is implementing our compliance program. This is an ongoing project, and it touches some of the items that we're considering in the proposed amendments. But the goal is to have a compliance program that ensures that the units that we've created under this program are still getting rented at the levels that we agreed them to be rented at, and that the households living in those units are eligible to be in those units. We'll also be looking to update the Housing Nexus study. So that study that I mentioned from 2018 was meant to have a 5-year period of relevance. So we're reaching the end of that period. An updated Housing Nexus study might mean that we get a recommendation to change what the required percentage is for affordable units, as well as the rate for the fee in lieu. And then we also will continue to gather feedback from our community stakeholders and listen to hear what these outcomes for the OHO are. And that will inform our work and potentially additional amendments to this living document. So thank you for listening to that little background on the OHO. That was something that we would have liked to have brought you during the study session, so apologies for not bringing it at that point. But now we'll kind of fast forward to the present time, and I'll just go through where this the proposed amendments to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance have been, and then I'll talk through what the revisions have been as well. So in terms of study session, the Port Authority saw this item first last month.
Could I get you to talk in the microphone pull a little closer? That'd help.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I'm missing some of it.
Sorry, apologies. So in January, we had study sessions with the Port Authority, Planning Commission, and the HRA, and we collected feedback from each of those bodies, and in some cases got feedback to go out to the housing developer community, and as well as look back at some of the outcomes of the affordable housing developments that have taken place in Bloomington and revise some of those proposed amendments. So we've done that. We're now bringing the amendments back to each of the three bodies and searching for a recommendation of approval to City Council. So the HRA approved their recommendation to City Council on February 13th. The Planning Commission did the same on February 15th, and now we've brought it to the Port Authority tonight with the hopes that you'll recommend approval to the City Council on March 18th. And that'll be a public hearing at the City Council. So I've brought a quick summary of some of the major feedback items that we received from the study sessions. So we heard from you, the Port Authority, that we wanted to emphasize the enforceability of any requirements that are within the ordinance. So ensuring that anything we're requiring is something we actually have the ability to look at and put developers to task on, so that they'll be complying with those requirements. So that was well received. We also heard from Planning Commission on getting clarity with the parking reduction incentive, and I'll provide more info on that later. We heard that that proposal of certain amendments would be best moved forward concurrently with Planning Division 2024 work items. We heard, again, on getting additional clarity for the proposed amendments to the storage space reduction incentive. And we also heard some appreciation of the effort to continue to maintain the Opportunity Housing Ordinance as a living document. So that is certainly the goal with the policy, and that will be, or with the ordinance, and that'll be the goal going forward. So I mentioned some major revisions, and I mentioned some of the feedback that we got that triggered these revisions. So I'm just going to go through these three items, and then I'll open it up for questions on anything else that you might have seen in the ordinance document that was in the packet for tonight. So the first major revision was to section 9.16.04, which was the impervious surface area maintenance proposal. So if you remember, when this item was brought back in January, the proposal was to remove our incentive for impervious surface area reduction and retool it to be a maintenance of impervious surface for commercial to residential conversion projects. The feedback that we got from the Planning Commission was that it would be best served to move this item alongside the 2024 office to residential conversion study work item. And that's to ensure that any changes to this incentive that are meant to benefit conversion projects doesn't work in counter to the planning code, to the zoning code. So the revised proposal is simply to remove the impervious surface area reduction incentive and then consider a rewrite alongside that work item in 2024. The next major revision is to section 9.19, which is the parking reduction incentive. So we got the feedback that there was a desire for more information and understanding of how developers would interact with this reduction study, parking study reduction, and when discretion would kick in for the city engineer or designee to require a parking study. So we looked back at the past 13 developments that did take the parking reduction incentive and found that the average percentage that was granted to developers was 28%. So with that in mind, we revised the proposal to bump that threshold when discretion kicks in from 10% to 30%. So this would exempt all but 5 projects from that last 13 projects that we've had. And it would only kick in when developers are seeking the highest reductions. So think 40%, 45%, and 30% as well. But again, the average that developers have sought is 28%. So the revised recommendation that you'll see reflected in that ordinance is that the discretion is the discretion for city engineer to require a parking study will kick in at the 30% level. And then finally, there is a major revision to section 9.23, the storage space reduction. So the feedback was received that we wanted to understand the relevance of the proposed incentive to providing 30% AMI units and understand what the storage space usage has been for developers. So we were able to connect with the housing developer community and heard back that in terms of a market-driven project, they're typically providing 10% of their dwelling units with an external storage space. So that's something like a bike cage in their parking structure in the sub-basement, or a cage against the wall inside of an enclosed parking stall.
Can I
Mr.
interrupt?
Luntz?
Yeah. Help me understand this a little bit. Incentive, it's a 90% storage space reduction incentive. Is that on all the units in a project or just the affordable units? So if you have 10 affordable units, 9 of them wouldn't need a storage space or reduced storage space. Do I have that? Is that what we're doing here?
President Commissioners, the 90% would be a reduction of the entire building's requirement for storage
Entire
spaces.
project. So if it's an integrated unit, so there wouldn't be. So would that allow a developer, if he had 100 units and 10 of them are affordable, he wouldn't need any storage space for any of the units, or whatever it is, whatever the threshold is?
President Commissioners,
I'm not getting this.
In your scenario, 10% of the dwelling units within that development would be provided storage spaces. So it's a 90% reduction to the entire building. So whatever the requirement
100
is,
units, 90 of them wouldn't need a storage space.
President Commissioners, correct.
Would a developer want to do that?
President Commissioners, that's the feedback that we received from the developer community, is that if they were providing a development with their market-driven demand in mind, that they would only be providing storage spaces to 10% of the units in a building.
Really? Okay. Thank you.
President Commissioners, so just to summarize, so the other feedback that we received is understanding, does this move the needle in terms of providing 30% AMI units? And the feedback that we received from the developer community is that it wouldn't. So as originally proposed, 20%, if 20% of units were provided at 30% AMI, there could be a 100% reduction in external storage spaces. And the feedback was, even with not having any required storage space, it wouldn't have moved the needle enough to provide that many 30% AMI units. So that was the other consideration with reducing the requirement to only 10%. And we looked back at developments that had 30% AMI units. So there aren't many that we've had. As you saw that spreadsheet, there's only around 32 units. But across the developments that did have those units, it was around, the 30% AMI units accounted for around 6 to 8% of the total dwelling units within those developments. So the reasoning, or the thinking here, is that if we have that threshold at 10%, then potentially the developer only needs to provide an additional 1 or 2 units at 30% AMI to get to this incentive level. So we're hoping that makes, they're not having to push the needle all the way to get from 0 to 10%. It's more likely that they've already provided a number of 30% AMI units and they're getting this benefit from providing 1 or 2. So we're trying to push them just to provide a few more. So that combined with that feedback that we got on providing 10% of dwelling units with an external storage space is how we got to the revised proposal of allowing for 90% reduction if a developer provides 10% of units at 30% AMI. And so those were the major revisions that I wanted to highlight, and those were changes from when you'd first seen this item back in January. But I'm definitely happy to cover any items that jumped out at you in the ordinance from the packet.
Board Authority questions? Commissioner?
Thank you. Just 2 quick questions. The Nexus study, when do you think that'll happen?
President Commissioners, the hopes would be sometime this year, and if not this year, early next year. And we are currently identifying funding sources, external funding sources to pay for that. In 2018, it was around $80,000 it was a 2-phase study, so around $80,000 for each phase. So we're trying to identify external funding to cover that cost.
Okay, great. Second question, the parking reduction, you noted that only 5 of the places would have been required under this to do the housing study. I assume under the old rules, they had to do a housing study as well, and the housing study supported the parking reduction greater than 30%. Am I understanding that?
President Commissioners, it was a parking study. So this would, or what we're considering is a parking study. So whether or not the area has capacity to provide like on-street parking, for example. And prior to this proposed amendment, there is no requirement and no discretion within ordinance for a parking study. So this is in response to a situation where a development did seek a 40% reduction in parking, and what's resulted in what the reality is currently is that they have experienced some overparking where guests aren't able to get spots within the lot of that apartment and have gone to park on the street where there isn't a designated place for them to park. So this is to give staff that discretion within ordinance to say, you're seeking the higher reduction and we have concerns that the area can't support the parking. We are requiring a parking study in this case.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Other questions? Well, Commissioner Luntz?
I'm back on the storage space thing. Is there any correlation? You're getting this feedback from the developers on big part. Is there a correlation between the size of the units and the storage space required? I mean, if you're building 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, would they have a greater or lesser need? I mean, for storage space versus efficiency studios, small 1 bedrooms. Is there a correlation there?
President Commissioners, no. Our code, it's unit type agnostic. So the requirement for storage space is the same across the board. I believe it's 175 cubic feet per unit. Cubic feet.
It's pretty good sized.
Mr. President, thank you, Mr. President. First of all, unit space agnostic is the first time I've ever heard that used, so I appreciate that a lot. That's very
Yay,
good.
Kenny.
And so, well done.
You want to say yay to him?
Yay, Kenny. Well done. And I just wanted to, Commissioner, when we first had this discussion on the council, I think it might even be pre your time, we had this discussion about storage space within new developments. And at that time, and I think I know Glenn can back this up, we got similar responses from the development community that people simply are not using storage spaces anymore within the apartment buildings. A variety of things. I think people in an apartment have sometimes less stuff. I think it has to do with the number of storage facilities within the city, so people can store externally and have a bigger space and store more things. And I think it's just it's different than when you and I went to college and we're living in an apartment somewhere. It's just a different time. And so we've been hearing this consistently over the past decade or so, that people in apartments simply do not, they whether it's provided for free or if they have to rent it, they simply don't use storage.
They must not have acquisition pat rack daughters like I do.
Well, that's probably true, yes. Mm-hmm.
We're down some.
Mm-hmm.
You've heard the old story when you take I hope this is not sexist, take a daughter and a son to college. The daughter, you're pulling U-Hauls. With a son, you got a boombox, 3 shirts, and a pair of pants, kind of a deal,
Okay. Do we have any other commissioner questions?
The tag on that, too, the dorm room has to be festive.
Well, I again want to just use this opportunity to thank the commissioners that met with Kenny after our last session and got additional information. And again, I think as we get into taking on new things, learning curve and that, it's really important to do that. And I appreciate the fact that people took time out of their schedule to do it. And I'm sure Kenny did too. And so we have on page 82, it says we need a motion to recommend approval of the amendments to the Opportunity Housing Ordinance to the City Council, by the City Council. Must be to the City Council.
Mr. President, I would move we recommend approval of the ordinance amendments as attached in the staff report related to preservation and development of affordable housing units, thereby amending Chapter 9 of the City Code.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any further discussion? All right. Mark, do you want to call the roll?
President Erickson,
Aye.
Commissioner Bussey,
Aye.
Commissioner Nelson,
Aye.
Commissioner Hunt,
Aye.
Commissioner Lenz, Commissioner Peterson.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. That gets us to item 3.5, Port Authority Administrator.
Thank you, President Erickson and Commissioners. Just a brief update this evening. We mentioned we are beginning our 5-year plan process with TIP Strategies, who's our consultant for this process. We are in what they would term the discovery phase, which means we're providing them with information about past planning efforts, census data, basically everything we have about the city of Bloomington and its economy. They have also asked as part of this phase to do some initial interviews with Port Authority commissioners and city council members. And so I just wanted to let you know that MART will be reaching out. Those will be virtual or phone calls, about 30 minutes each. And then from there, we'll be forming a steering committee with other community members that are interested in the Bloomington economic future. And we'll be doing a series of roundtables with other members of the community, one-time roundtables. But the steering committee will be meeting with us every month throughout the process to review the data. And so we're looking forward to engaging with you and with others. I may seek some help from some of you with community members you think should be part of this process. Commissioner Hunt, I have particular questions for you from the banking community. But I just wanted to let you know that ask was coming. Any questions?
Anything else?
No.
If not, I think we're adjourned. I don't think we need a roll call for that, Mara.